are there plans to outfit face masks with actual N-95 material? There's talk of that being possible, that every face mask has a mask built within it. Is that possible?
Well, I would say we're exploring a number of different options, again, very collaboratively with the Players Association. We have a number of consulting engineers that we work with on both of our groups. And so all ideas are on the table and all options are being looked at because, again, our goal is to mitigate risk as much as we possibly can. So I would say we have very active discussions about those types of devices, and we continue to see what makes the most sense and does the best job for mitigating risk for our players while still being compatible with the game of football.
I also couldn't help but noticing with Tier 1, again, in this club facility protocol for the 2020 season, Dr. Alan Sills, a couple more minutes left with the Chief Medical Officer of the National Football League. I couldn't help but notice that it wasn't a requirement that masks be worn by players, coaches, athletic trainers when they're around, because it is specifically mentioned for Tier 2 individuals. Are you planning on just saying, you know what, players are around each other and within the facilities, they're not going to be required to wear masks?
No, that's actually not what we said initially in most of these protocols. We've stated that masks are not worn on the field during the athletic competition for those Tier 1 individuals. But when they're in the facility, if they're in meeting rooms, if they're in dining areas, we do anticipate that masks and other PPE will be appropriate. And I think that's one important point. Sometimes people say, well, gosh, if I'm being tested, maybe I don't need to bother with all that. And we don't feel that way for several reasons. First of all, no test is 100% accurate. There are always, some things that are not going to be caught by your testing program. And secondly, the time development, the course of symptoms, and when someone's infectious, is still to be worked out. And thirdly, again, the responsibility of others in the testing environment. So I think that, just because someone's being tested doesn't mean they don't need to wear PPE. The real thought behind the testing is there's certain situations in football, as we've talked about on the field, where PPE can't be fully worn, and so there is some risk exposure there. And so that's the thought why the testing adds in some extra layer of safety above which PPE alone would.
Well, I'm glad, I wanted to bring that to the fore. You gave the answer that you gave, because so many people do look to the NFL for leadership on so many different fronts. And I'm talking about society in general. And that's important for people to know about wearing masks writ large as we go about our businesses. Even if you've been tested, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't wear one. So I guess my last question for you is, what can you tell people who are reading about possible therapeutics? I imagine you are on the front lines with the NFL in connecting with drug companies and finding out whether there could be some sort of medication that's either out there as a drug that's being used for other purposes right now that could be repurposed to help the fight of COVID-19, or even shorten the amount of time that somebody could be within what we just established, potentially a COVID-19 protocol. What can you tell people about what you know about therapeutics for the fall?
Well, I remain very optimistic that we're going to see some major advances made in therapeutics and really in all these areas. And I think one point to keep in mind that's related to that is, I know that for all of us, it feels like since we started this, when everything shut down with the first positive cases, that feels like, roughly 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it feels like a very long time. It's actually only been about 3 months. And there's an equal amount of time, or a little more time, in fact, in front of us between now and the start of the NFL regular season. And so the point is, think about how much we've learned, how much knowledge has been gained, how much more we know today than we did early in this pandemic. I'd expect us to make similar jumps in knowledge, because there's so much work being done on therapeutics, on testing, on the epidemiology. And that work is certainly going to inform us. We're going to keep that on the forefront, and I'm hopeful that some of those therapeutics indeed will come into play. But again, we're just going to have to let the medical science work its way through. 3 months is a very long time to us to stay at home and to isolate. That's a very short time in the scientific world for development of things like vaccines or new therapeutics. So we'll have to remain patient, but we're certainly monitoring that very, very closely.
Okay, and I guess then that's my last one for you. You mentioned vaccine. So many people out there want to know about fans in the stands and whether they need one to feel comfortable returning. Where are you on that subject with fans in the stands and your expectation of a vaccine potentially in time for, let's just say, a playoffs for an NFL season in 2020?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to predict when a vaccine may be available. I mean, vaccine development is a lot tougher than people think. If you've been around the medical world for a while, you know that there are a lot of starts and stops with that. And so I think we will get to the point of having a vaccine. It's just very, very difficult to put a timeline on that. But I think that will certainly get here. I think in the meantime, as far as fans go, we've expressed repeatedly we would like to have fans be present if it's possible to do so, meaning if it's safe to do so. So, again, we'll continue to work with the public health authorities. We'll look at what the state of the knowledge is. We'll be informed by what other leagues around the world and in our own country have learned and have done in that regard. And we'll make the best and the safest decision at that point in time. And as we mentioned before, what happens in September could be very different from what happens in January. We'll just have to continue to be flexible and to adapt as new knowledge comes out.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.